those of us who grew up in the 1950s could take for granted things which seem like luxuries to children today. We had no idea what we were overthrowing when we rebelled against our parents, when we indulged ourselves by taking advantage of the new no-fault divorce laws. For the first time, spouses could abandon a blameless spouse for any reason or no reason. No-fault divorce, which was supposed to lower the costs of divorce for a very small number of people whose marriages had broken down, in fact, did much more than that. In fact, it induced a whole range of new bad behaviors that would have been unimaginable in earlier times. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is that no-fault divorce changed the underlying structure of marriage as a social institution. It took away the idea that marriage would be a permanent relationship. Instead of a presumption of permanence, which the law upheld and which society agreed on, the law now had a presumption of impermanence, siding with the party who wants to end the marriage. The old system allowed divorce in carefully prescribed situations and with serious disincentives to discourage it. That law accommodated the exceptions to the rule of permanence, but without undermining that essential presumption. Now let's take a quick look over our shoulders to the issue of same-sex marriage, which is what we're going to talk about most of the time tonight. Same-sex marriage also changes the structure of marriage in a more profound way than no-fault divorce did. Instead of marriage being a gender-based institution ordered toward the procreation and rearing and protection of children, marriage will become a gender-neutral institution with concern for children moved completely to the side. It will become an adult-centered institution. The redefinition of marriage will change the incentives about what kinds of unions to form and whether to get married at all. Legalizing same-sex marriage is part of a movement to make same-sex relationships and opposite-sex relationships equally acceptable. And so there are many things that are going to change when we redefine marriage to be the union of any two persons rather than being the union of a man and a woman. And so just like it was a big mistake to think that no-fault divorce was only going to change one little thing, it's a big mistake to think that same-sex marriage is only going to change one little thing. And what you're going to hear from me tonight is absolutely nothing about people with same-sex attraction. You're not going to hear anything from me about that there's something wrong with them or that they're somehow unworthy of marriage. Unlike what Judge Walker said in the courtroom in San Francisco, unlike what the city of San Francisco alleged in its brief, my opposition, and I bet your opposition too, to same-sex marriage has almost nothing to do with what you think about people with same-sex attraction. It has to do with what we think about marriage. The issue is, what is marriage? The issue is, what do we think about marriage? And we believe that by changing the legal structure around marriage, you're going to induce a whole lot of changes to the whole institution that are going to affect everybody. And that's why we care about it, and that's why it matters. And so that's what we want to focus on in the rest of our time here tonight. What is the essential public purpose of marriage? Let's just ask ourselves that question. What is the essential public purpose of marriage? Now, I say that deliberately because there are a lot of inessential purposes of marriage. Okay, there are a lot of things that are not essential. Okay, so when we get married, we have companionship, we have friendship. Okay, you don't need marriage in order to have friendship, right? So that can't be the essential purpose of marriage, right? And then there are private reasons that people get married that have nothing to do with the public reasons. So you might get married because you want the beautiful dress, or because you want to irritate your last boyfriend, or because you want to make your mother mad, or you want to get out of the house. People have all kinds of reasons, and the priests are rolling their eyes back there because they know, they've seen all these crazy things, you know, these kind of motivations that people have that are private reasons. Now, I'm not saying anything bad about those private reasons. I'm just saying if the only reason for marriage was the sum total of those private reasons, you wouldn't bother to have marriage, right? If the only point was to have a nice dress and a big party, you don't need marriage for that, right? So what is the essential public purpose of marriage? And now again, this is not theological, this is now sociological. The essential public purpose of marriage is to attach mothers and fathers to their children and to one another. That's the essential public purpose of marriage, to attach mothers and fathers to their children and to one another. Now, why is that important? Because of this principle. Because kids are entitled to a relationship with both of their parents, right? They're entitled to a relationship with both of their parents. Now you can see this another way by, imagine we didn't reproduce the way that we do. Imagine we were like amoeba or something and we just kind of divided to make a new human. You wouldn't need sexual reproduction, so you wouldn't need a man and a woman. No one would have ever thought of marriage, obviously. There wouldn't be male and female, just wouldn't make any sense. You wouldn't have that. What if we were born as adults and were perfectly capable of managing on our own the minute we were hatched out of our eggs? Like snakes or something, right? The mother snake, father snake, the babies hatch, they slither away. Not much pair bonding amongst reptiles as far as I know, okay? You don't need mother snake and father snake to raise the babies, okay? So the essential public purpose of marriage has to do with attaching mothers and fathers to their children and each other for the benefit of the children and the benefit of the whole society. And it's essential, and it's fundamental to the kind of beings that we are. If those things didn't exist, nobody would have ever thought about marriage, right? If we were like snakes or something, all right? So the child here, this principle means that the child is entitled to a relationship with both of their parents. If you believe that, that means that the child has an interest in the stability of their parents' union. See, a child has a legitimate interest in the stability of their parents' union because that union, their togetherness, is what is crucial to the child having a relationship with both of them, right? Right? And so that's why you need something that will protect the child's interest. And the institution that adult societies worldwide, across time and place, have come up with is marriage, to protect the child's interest in a relationship with both parents and to protect both of the parents and their common interest of raising the child, so that one parent doesn't just dash off with the child and neglect the interests of the other party. You see what I mean? So this is why this institution exists in time and place all over the world right up until the day before yesterday. This was a universal human institution, and this is why. And so I think if you start from that premise to think about it as being an issue of justice for the child, that's a very helpful perspective to begin with. Okay, so what I'm going to do for the first part of this presentation is to talk with you about some key principles that are currently principles of law and social practice, and talk with you about how same-sex marriage is going to undermine those key principles and what kinds of problems we can expect as a result of undermining those principles. So let's start with the beginning. The first key principle that same-sex marriage will undermine is the idea that children are ordinarily entitled to a relationship with their mothers and their fathers. There's a basic presumption in our society that children are ordinarily entitled to a relationship with their mothers and their fathers. Now we know that this doesn't always happen. We know there are exceptions. We know there are situations where the biological mother and father can't be there for the kids for one reason or another. And we have a special social institution that's designed to deal with that problem. It's called adoption, right? And now, adoption is an institution that is a child-centered institution. As we understand adoption today, adoption deals with the exception to this basic principle, the exceptional situation where the mother and father are not available to take care of the child. And it is a child-centered exception to the existing law that doesn't undermine the basic principle. Right? So nobody believes that because we have adoption, that somehow means that kids don't care about their biological parents, or that somehow kids aren't entitled or shouldn't have a relationship with their mother and father. Nobody believes that about adoption. Adoption exists now to give children the parents they need, not to give adults the kids they want. That's the key thing. Adoption exists to give kids the parents they need, not to give adults the kids that they happen to want. So even though we know there are exceptional situations, the way we deal with that exceptional situation doesn't undermine the basic principle, okay? And same-sex marriage is basically claiming that kids don't need particularly a mother and a father, that they don't need a relationship with both of their parents. Those of you who are walking around with the 77 non-religious reasons, in there I quote verbatim from 2 separate court cases where judges have upheld same-sex marriage, and they have specifically said it's a myth that children need a mother and a father. Okay, the Supreme Court of the state of Iowa specifically said it's a myth that children need a mother and a father. Okay, so that's what you have to say if you're going to say that the union of a same-sex couple is the equivalent of the union of a man and a woman. You have to come up with something like that. Okay, so the next key principle, that's a principle of law and social practice, is that mothers and fathers are not interchangeable. That is, we don't really believe that moms and dads are perfect substitutes for one another, such that if you have two moms and 2 dads, or one of each, that it's a coin toss amongst those things, you know, that it doesn't make any difference. Now, to help you see that this is the case, I'd like you to think back to your days as a teenager, and imagine that you've crashed the family car, and now you call home to confess what has happened, what you've done. Do you care whether it's your father who answers the phone or whether it's your mother who answers the phone? Okay, so you know what I'm trying to say here. Okay, so the father's position as authority figure makes him unique here, okay? Now one time, I have to tell you, I was doing a debate on same-sex marriage, and I told this joke. This was at a law school back east, and I told this joke and no one laughed. And I thought, oh man, I'm in trouble. I'm in trouble with this audience, because they all have it in their mind, right, that because they could think of an exception where that wasn't the case, where you could think of some families somewhere some of the time where that wasn't the case, that invalidated the general principle. See, that's how young people are trained to think now, right, that there isn't any difference between men and women, so therefore there's no difference between mothers and fathers. So you can see, if you don't get the point of gender in the first place, you're not going to get the point of gendered marriage. Right? And that's part of the reason that a lot of the young people are being drawn into the idea of same-sex marriage being an acceptable thing, or even a good thing, because they're not seeing the point of gender. That kids ordinarily need a relationship with a mother and father. Now, there's a lot of information that we could talk about under this heading, but I want to just tell you, first of all, that the proponents of same-sex marriage are steadily undermining that body of evidence by saying it doesn't really prove what it seems to prove. So let me just mention some of the evidence that's out there. First of all, we have a lot of evidence about fatherlessness in the family, and that fatherlessness has a serious impact on the development of children, right? And that it has a different impact on boys than it has on girls. So if you look at child development, I don't care what topic you're looking at in child development, you will see that boys and girls are always studied separately, right? So if you're studying school achievement, or when you get your first word, or when you walk first, or when you start to crawl, all of those different topics that child development people study, they always look at girls and boys differently. Why? Because every major developmental milestone comes in at a different time and in a different way. Boys and girls are different from the very beginning. So fatherlessness affects the boys and the girls differently. With boys, it's very likely that I shouldn't say it's very likely, I should say there's an increased probability. There's a heightened probability of a fatherless boy getting into trouble, being involved in juvenile delinquency, violence, joining gangs, getting incarcerated, going to jail, all of that kind of stuff. And people who do prison work will tell you most of the guys in jail are fatherless, like 70% is usually the number that you hear, okay? So it's a very serious risk factor for boys, that their ability to learn to be a man is compromised by not having a father figure in the home.